Hey, welcome to The Explainer. Today, we are pulling back the curtain on the invisible code that's making some of the most important decisions in our society. So let's just dive right in, because we need to start with a pretty shocking mistake made by one algorithm in particular. From who gets a loan to who gets a job, even who gets out on bail. Algorithms aren't just for tech companies anymore. They're now buried deep inside our social structures, and their judgments can literally change the entire course of a person's life. So let's talk about the compass algorithm. This thing is used in courtrooms all across the United States. Its job? To predict the likelihood that a defendant will commit another crime. And judges use this risk score to help make huge decisions about things like bail and sentencing. The stakes, they just could not be higher. But here's where it gets wild. A groundbreaking investigation by ProPublica found something really, really disturbing. Take a look at these error rates. The algorithm was almost twice as likely to falsely flag Black defendants as being high risk compared to white defendants. And at the same time, it was actually more likely to get it wrong in the other direction for white defendants, labeling them as low risk when they weren't. So you have to ask, how could a system built on supposedly objective data get it so wrong? Well, the answer isn't some simple programming bug. The problem is that these algorithms are trained on data from our world. And our world has a very long and complicated history of inequality. So the algorithm isn't broken. It's more like a mirror, perfectly reflecting the biases that are already embedded in our society. To really get how this happens, we have to look deeper at the hidden architecture of injustice itself. Okay, so first up is this concept called structural injustice. The idea, which comes from the sociologist Iris Marion Young, is that harm often doesn't come from one bad person with evil intentions. Instead, it comes from the everyday, normal way our systems and institutions operate. And an algorithm can basically put that whole process on autopilot, making discrimination feel like it's just a neutral, unavoidable outcome. And predictive policing is a perfect example of how this works in practice. So these algorithms use historical crime data to tell police where to go. But if certain neighborhoods have been over-policed for decades, well, the data is going to show more arrests there. The algorithm learns that pattern, sends more police back to those exact same areas, and boom, you've created a feedback loop where the system's normal function just keeps perpetuating that same inequality. Next up, we've got these ideas of capital and habitus from the sociologist Pierre Bourdieu. And boiled down, it means that our systems often reward the specific skills, experiences, and resources, the capital, that are more common among privileged groups. An algorithm can learn to see those traits as a sign of success, while at the same time penalizing anyone who comes from a different background, or habitus. Just think of an AI hiring tool that learns to favor candidates from fancy universities, not because they're actually better, but just because that's the pattern it found in the company's past data. And all of this leads to something called structural violence. This is the kind of harm that happens when the very way society is set up prevents people from getting basic things like housing, or healthcare, or a job. And when you add algorithms to the mix, the harm gets automated, and the perpetrator becomes completely invisible. If an algorithm denies you a loan, who's to blame? The programmer? The bank? It makes it incredibly difficult to even know who to fight back against. And finally, the philosopher Nancy Fraser points out that justice really has two key parts. First, there's redistribution, making sure resources and opportunities are shared fairly. The basic stuff. And second, there's recognition, making sure people's identities are respected and not squashed by stereotypes. The thing is, algorithmic bias often fails on both of these fronts at the exact same time. It denies people resources and reinforces harmful labels. And look, this isn't just about the justice system. Not by a long shot. Once you learn to spot this pattern, you start seeing it absolutely everywhere. Get this, Amazon had to scrap an AI hiring tool because it learned from 10 years of their own hiring data that the company mostly hired men. So the system literally taught itself to downgrade resumes that mention things like women's chess club captain. It was basically automating a pre-existing gender bias. Or how about this one? In Michigan, a single automated system called Midas falsely accused over 40,000 people of unemployment fraud. And with zero human review, lives were just shattered. People were forced into bankruptcy, their reputations were ruined, all by a faulty algorithm. This isn't just a glitch, it's structural violence on a massive scale. Think about the logic here for a second. A major healthcare algorithm that's used all over the US basically decided that how much money you spend on healthcare is the same as how healthy you are. Because of all sorts of systemic barriers, Black patients have historically spent less on care. So the algorithm misinterpreted this to mean they were healthier. And as a result, it directed fewer critical resources to them, even when they were just as sick as white patients. It's just a devastatingly flawed assumption. And the list, it just keeps going. From education, where algorithms have penalized students from poorer schools, to housing, immigration, and even child welfare, these systems are being rolled out with very similar, very damaging results. So, I know, this all feels pretty bleak. But the good news is that people are fighting for a better way. The goal isn't to get rid of technology, but to build it with justice at its very core. So let's take a look at the path forward. On the policy front, we're seeing a couple of different approaches emerge. You've got the European Union, which has passed its AI Act. It's this sweeping law that regulates systems based on how risky they are. The United States, on the other hand, has a much more fragmented, state-by-state approach, with no single federal law setting a universal standard. But beyond just policy, there's this new framework emerging called justice-centered design. And at its heart, it's a completely new way of thinking about how we build this stuff. It means giving the communities who are actually affected a real say in how these tools are built. It means you have to acknowledge and actively correct for biased historical data. It means designing for both fairness in resources and respect for identity. And finally, it means creating strong legal rights, like the right to an explanation and the right to appeal an algorithm's decision. And all this brings us to the fundamental choice that we as a society are facing right now. Because look, these systems are already here. They're sorting our job applications, they're assessing our credit, they're shaping our opportunities every single day. The debate over whether to use them, that's over. They are part of our world.
So the real question, the one we have to answer, is what are we going to do with them? Are we just going to let them become these invisible engines of inequality, just automating all the biases of the past? Or are we going to consciously design them and govern them to challenge those biases and maybe, just maybe, build a world that is more fair, more equitable, and more just? That choice, that's up to all of us.